is
Yeah.
close to that.
But also a quick announcement. Follow me and Tristan were supposed to go on around this time. They were supposed to do Is Gravity a Force? But Follow Me has a headache. He is out sick. So what we've decided via DMs during this debate is to have NoDegree and TinySmawz debate right now, rather than Follow Me versus Tristan on Is Gravity a Force? Follow Me versus Tristan will be on another event. It's going to be on June 1st, where OG Kyle is going to be debating somebody on is abortion or can abortion be justified? Moving their debate to a different event. But right now we're going to do the TinySmawz versus NoDegree as quickly as possible, and then we're going to get to the Just Jim versus Kai debate eventually. People are saying the lag is bad.
How about now? I try to so I just turn on the Wi-Fi to see if it's better. If not, I'll just turn off the Wi-Fi. I don't know if it's the Wi-Fi that's doing it. It's better?
How about now, audience?
Okay, it's better. Okay, good.
Okay. So, TinySmawz versus NoDegree. You guys are debating on is the existence of God justified? We're going to jump right into it and get started so we can get it done and go to Just Jim versus Kai. So you guys are going to be 7-minute openers, 5-minute, 3 rounds of 5-minute cross-examination, and then 3-minute closers. You guys good with that?
Hey, 3 rounds of 5 minutes?
Yeah, 3 rounds of cross-examination.
I don't think we need 3 rounds. 2 seems plenty to me if you wanted to cut it short a little bit.
Okay, that's totally fine because we're kind of short on time. But yeah, that's
cool. Okay.
So your topic is the existence of God justified? You're taking the affirmative NoDegree, so you're going to get your 7-minute opener first. And it starts, hold on. It starts whenever you say your first word.
Okay, so is the existence of God justified? Admittedly, this is kind of an odd title for me. I haven't ever debated in this the exact wording before. So I was trying to figure out how to actually approach this. So I was thinking, okay, so how am I supposed to approach is the existence of God justified? So I got to thinking, well, is the existence of God justified as opposed to what? The non-existence of God? So is the non-existence of God justified? So let's look at these two and compare them. Someone who supposedly thinks the non-existence of God is justified will likely hold to these absurd positions. Getting something from nothing, getting life from non-life, getting order from chaos, getting the immaterial from physical material. These are paradoxical, absurd beliefs we refer to as the 4 miracles of atheism. On the contrary, the existence of God justified offers a better explanatory power for something rather than nothing, the origins of life, why the universe seems orderly and observable, and why the material and immaterial coexist. Next, the non-existence of God position leads people to believe in the absurd theory of evolution naturally without any divine being behind it. The very theory implies our minds are lacking and incomplete, and yet we assume we can reliably obtain knowledge with this incomplete, fallible, finite tool, which undermines the very theory of evolution itself and even the justification to reliably know anything at all. While the existence of God teaches that we have a complete mind capable of reliably obtaining knowledge from the beginning, and that God can fill any epistemic gaps that we might have. Holding to the non-existence of God leads one to not to be able to justify things like the uniformity of nature, the laws of logic, the validity of inductive reasoning, the reliability of cognitive faculties, moral standards that we all take for granted that are part and parcel of a Christian worldview, but can't be justified on the non-existence of God position. The non-existence of God position will lead atheists to sometimes, when it suits them, to throw science under the bus and try to justify postmodern positions, but then contradict themselves by trying to use science again against the theist. While the existence of God justifies the consistency and reliability in things like science, philosophy, law, and social norms we all take for granted, the non-existence of God leads atheists to reject historical facts concerning Jesus Christ or explaining them in a way that leads to absurd conspiracy theories, like maybe aliens rose Jesus from the dead, or maybe the Christian worldview and its transformation on the world was the result of hallucinations or self-delusions, or maybe an invention of man to control the masses, to try to explain why Jesus Christ transformed the world. These absurd conspiracy theories that atheists bite off to try to reject Jesus Christ leave them in a position, epistemic position, to where they can't even rule out that their own beliefs and knowledge are not the result of these same things. While the existence of God gives us reasonable explanation for the historical facts of Jesus Christ and doesn't undermine their knowledge, and we can reasonably conclude that Jesus Christ did in fact rise from the dead and that God raised him, thereby showing the existence of God is justified. Holding to the non-existence of God leads one to fall into philosophical problems, things like I like to refer to as the biting the hand that feeds you problem for atheists, where an atheist will deny theism, but then end up holding beliefs and ideologies that has its roots in theism. A more specific example of this would be what I like to call the Christian moral framework problem for atheists, where an atheist will criticize the Bible and Christianity on a more, or theism more broadly, using moral values and beliefs that they gained and obtained by the influence of Christianity on their lives. So they're literally criticizing theism by using theistic beliefs that gave them these beliefs. So they're biting the hand that feeds them here. We also have other problems where an atheist on the non-existence of God view, an atheist cannot rule out solipsism. They cannot rule out that they're a brain in a vat. They basically have to just believe, even though there's no evidence that they're not a brain in a vat. But then they somehow appeal to evidence and wanting Christians to provide evidence to show for them that Christianity or theism is true. So these are just a number of philosophical problems and issues that arise in the non-existence of God position. So when you compare, is the existence of God justified? And then you look at, well, let's compare it to the non-existence of God justification. Then we reasonably conclude that the existence of God is vastly superior and definitely justified, and the non-existence of God leaves the atheist, metaphorically speaking, scared, alone, naked, and confused, without any ability to justify anything. And that is my opening.
Okay, with that, you had 43 seconds on the clock. TinySmawz, it's now time for your opening statement, 7 minutes, and it starts when you say your first word.
Oh, buddy. All right. Today we are going to examine the claim of God's existence and if this claim has been justified. Before we examine this, let's define terms. Firstly, let's define justify as to show or prove to be right or reasonable. This is evidence-based, and this examination of reasons for correctness or sufficiency of a particular belief or set of beliefs, and if it has justification. Now let's go to the next term, existence. It means the fact or state of living or having objective reality. This would be something demonstrated, something outside of the mind or stance of an individual or group of individuals who hold to a particular narrative. The word God, as defined by the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, is known as a maximally great being with the attributes of omniscience, or all-seeing and all-knowing, omnipotence, or maximally powerful, omnipresence, or everywhere all at once, and omnibenevolence, or all good. This is the classical Christian definition of this particular God. This is the God my opponent follows. It's the Christian God. This God is known to come from the Holy Bible. This God has been claimed to hold these properties and attributes. And these attributes have not been demonstrated both empirically or philosophically. This is the purpose of this dialectic. Now that we have a definition for God, let's look into another particular definition for a specific word I'd love to focus on. This word is straw man. This is an important word to identify for my interlocutor. A straw man is a fallacy in which you distort or misrepresent the argument or position of your interlocutor during a debate in an attempt to refute their argument. This method of argumentation fails to properly represent the opposition's view, and it does not refute their position. This straw man is an attack on the position and a false representation. It's a fugazi. This is a prophecy I'm making here that this debate we are currently engaged in will have at least one of these straw man arguments to represent the atheist position. This is from prior experience with my current interlocutor. This will happen. It is foretold. This is a prophetic proclamation. The purpose of my argument is as follows: to examine the claim God exists as being reasonable and having sufficient evidence. My position is as follows. I reject the proposition God exists. That's it. Quite literally, the only entailment of my view. Any other atheist can say God does not exist. This is not my view. I'm presenting the view that rejects the claim of the God's existence. It is the rejection of the claim based on the merits of this. It is the rejection of the claim based on the merits of this claim being unjustified, undemonstrated, without proper explanatory power, and without proper execution of evidence in all categories. I am not making execution of evidence in all categories. I am not making the claim God does not exist here. I am making the claim that I am unconvinced of and have not been presented with a violation is. This is an undemonstrated and unjustified position. The onus of this argument is that of my interlocutor, and any attempt to shift the burden onto me as a direction towards concession. I hope to not shift the burden here myself, and I also hope to have a valuable discussion with succinct and coherent ideas that support this claim in question. I'm rooting for you. Again, just to reiterate, my position is not God doesn't exist. My position is the claim that God exists is unsubstantiated, unjustified, and undemonstrated as of yet. This debate is to hold the burden where it lays, on the theist. Again, my prophecy is that there will be strawmanning, burden shifting, and that my opponent will bring in a non sequitur, just as an added bonus. I hope everyone learns from this debate, and that all of us enjoy this at the very least for the entertainment value. I greatly appreciate everyone, and I hope we all enjoy the show. And also I'd like to add that my girlfriend says God is a bitch, and whether God exists or not, I think that's correct. Thank you.
Okay, and there is 2 minutes and 25 seconds left on the clock. So now we're going to go into cross-examinations. Each cross-examination period is going to be 5 minutes. So NoDegree, you can start yours. I'll start it whenever you say your first word.
Okay, so I guess the first question I would ask based on his opening is, Tiny, is the non-existence of God justified?
Not my position. Again, I just want to reiterate, my position as the claim God exists has not been justified. I'm unconvinced of it.
Okay, well, my question wasn't that. My question is the non-existence of God justified?
Again, that would be a straw man, so I'm not going to engage in that.
No, I mean, it's just a direct yes
proposition.
No. Either it is or it isn't.
Well, that's not my position, so I don't know.
Okay, so, but you said, and I wrote what you said here, quote, I'm rejecting the proposition that God exists. So if you're rejecting the proposition that God exists, I'm just simply asking, is the non-existence of God justified?
Has nothing to do with anything I said.
Okay, so I don't understand. How is it the case that you can say, I reject the proposition that God exists, and then still say, oh, well, I'm not holding to the non-existence of God? That's what I'm struggling to understand here. And if you're not holding to it, then, I mean, why would you reject the non-existence of God at that point?
Prophecy is foretold. So again, my position is not that God doesn't exist.
Okay, so you're not rejecting the non-existence of God. So you're saying that there's no justification for the non-existence of God. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that the position God exists is still in question.
My question here is, since according to you, you're saying I'm rejecting the proposition that God exists, I'm asking you, are you holding to the what is the title of this debate? The non-existence of God. Are you saying that that is justified? Okay, so it's true for you that the non-existence of God is justified.
I don't know why you keep asking me the same question I've already answered.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, because I really don't understand how someone could say, I reject, and I wrote it down here, I reject the proposition that God exists, but then still try to say, I'm also rejecting the justification for the non-existence of God. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. And it just seems to be that I don't know, you're in some sort of la-la land position here.
Well, what you just said is not the topic.
Okay, so when you said I'm rejecting the proposition that God exists, was that just a mess up? You shouldn't have said that. Is that what you're saying?
And the rejection is based on the proposition God exists being unjustified. If there was a justification for this, then I wouldn't hold like a position in which I haven't accepted or been convinced that God exists. It has nothing to do with God's non-existence.
Are you holding to some sort of position like I lack belief in the existence of God?
Say that I'm unconvinced that God exists.
And you're also unconvinced in the non-existence of God, right?
I'm unconvinced that God exists. Finally.
Yeah, and you're also unconvinced in the non-existence of God, right? Because you're saying that the non-existence of God lacks justification. Well, I'm just trying to figure out here. Obviously, the title of the topic is the existence of God justified? And I assume you're going to say, no, the existence of God is not justified, which kind of implies the non-existence of God is justified. So that's kind of where I'm trying to go here. But you're not saying the non-existence of God is justified. So I'm just trying to figure out what's going on.
Waiting to be convinced that God exists.
Okay, but are you waiting to be convinced that God does not exist as well?
Again, that's not the topic. I'm waiting for God to be justified.
Okay, so are you convinced that God does not exist?
And that's not my position. My position is I'm unconvinced of God's existence.
I'm waiting to be convinced that God exists, is what you're saying.
Okay,
but you're saying it.
Finish your last sentence.
You're also saying that you're not convinced of the non-existence of God. So honestly, I'm not sure what you're saying here, to be honest with you.
Okay, with that, we will move on to the second half of the first round of cross-examination. Tiny, it's your turn. You get 5 minutes to end the first round of cross-examination. It starts when you say your first sentence.
Okay, so again, this debate is all about the onus of the theist. So if you could please provide some sort of evidence that supports the God that you believe in and its existence, please.
Well, I think the minimal facts argument for Jesus Christ and his impact on the world is very good evidence for the existence of the Christian God. And that God raised him from the dead. And since God raised him from the dead, then God exists. So you want me to give him more detail of that?
I'd like to know what the evidence for the resurrection is outside of the Gospels.
Well, there are certain things that even non-Christian historians have been willing to say, yeah, we can consider these based on the historical method as historical facts about Jesus. One being that he was unalive. Obviously, he was a historical person who was unalive by Pilate in the first century for being some sort of political rebel, as Bart Ehrman says. That his disciples who were following him went, after this kind of went into this time of scared fleeing to all of a sudden claiming to have experienced the resurrected Jesus, which transformed them into boldly proclaiming the resurrection in Jerusalem, which led to this people changing their beliefs, Jewish people who changed their primary day of worship from Saturday to Sunday. And this spread, the resurrections, this story of the resurrection spread. And later, James, well, apparently maybe not too much later, but James, Jesus' brother, converted, and then afterwards, Paul. So this historical data that we have, I believe, leads one to reasonably believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and otherwise would lead an atheist to reject it, into having to bite such philosophical bullets that they can't even rule out that their own beliefs are not the result of the same things that they're rejecting Christianity for.
Okay. Was any of that supposed to be evidence for the resurrection?
Yes. Evidence is just simply something that increases the probability of something being true. Evidence is just, it's not actually really hard.
Hold on. Did you back up any of those claims with any historical facts? Because these were all claims that you made. Do you have any support for these claims?
Well, I could give you quotes from what scholars have said about these things, if that's what you're wanting.
Okay. So do you think that this is the only God that's possible?
Yes.
Okay, based on what?
Well, based on my Christian worldview. I mean, obviously, God knew what it would take to convince me that he exists, and I've studied these others, and they just seem lacking and man-made, and I don't find that to be the case with Christianity and the Christian God. So, I mean, I guess you could say, well, if God exists, he would know what it takes to get me to believe. I do believe, so therefore God must exist. And these other gods wasn't able to accomplish that.
So that's for you. That's like your own personal belief.
Yes. Is that going to convince you?
What else besides your own personal biases and your information from apologetic sources? Like, what outside of the Christian narrative shows that historically this person, Jesus, resurrected?
Well, I already give you a list of the historical facts that would be outside of the, I mean, they're not getting this primarily just studying the Bible. There's a number of sources that they're getting this from, extra biblical sources. They're also using the Bible, but there's also extra biblical sources. Well, there's
extra biblical sources?
Writings outside of the Bible, like maybe Josephus or Pliny the Younger or Tacitus or something like that.
Hey man, what does Josephus mention about Jesus?
I don't really recall specifically. I just know that that's what Bart Ehrman has referred to.
Haven't really done much research into these claims?
No, I haven't.
Or?
I haven't read Josephus. No.
Okay, we're going to call it and move on to the second round of cross-examination. NoDegree, your cross-examination will start whenever you say your first word.
Well, I think, kind of continuing on for this, the historical, I mean, I'm sure you heard of Gary Habermas's minimal facts argument, haven't you?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Okay, so Gary Habermas is a philosopher, theologian, and he wrote a paper, I believe it was his doctoral dissertation. And what he did with this was he took, during that time period, the 1970s, these certain minimal historical facts about Jesus that was either kind of viewed as a consensus at the time and stuff like this. And he said, okay, when you put these facts together, the reasonable explanation here is that Jesus rose from the dead. And basically, if you reject that, you have to come up with alternative explanations for these facts. So I guess my question would be, what would be your alternative explanation from Jesus raising from the dead?
Clarify on what these facts are, please.
Sure. From Jesus raising from the dead.
Clarify on what these facts are, please.
Sure. He's used any number of different facts, but usually it's something like Jesus unalived by crucifixion, that his disciples went into despair and lost hope, that his disciples sometime after that, shortly after that, claimed to have experienced the resurrected Jesus. And some of them, the more controversial one is the tomb empty. The tomb was empty. It was found empty. And that's a more controversial one. But there are even non-Christian scholars who say, yeah, they believe as a historical fact the tomb was found empty. They went from defeated followers to proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Jewish people who had the Sabbath, their primary day of worship, started making Sunday their primary day of worship off of this. This was spread in Jerusalem where it began, which means it would be easy to refute it if it wasn't true. And then you have James, who converted at some point later, who was a skeptic, his own brother. And then you have Paul, who was a persecutor of the church, who also converted on the claim that he had some sort of experience with Jesus himself later on. And this basically resulted in the spread of Christianity across the world. So the obvious question is, with these really uncontroversial facts here, what would be a better explanation than Jesus raising from the dead?
There's a myriad of different explanations. It could be just a misinterpretation of the events that people had. It could be people's memories. It could be, different opinions. It could be a number of things. It could be that there were multiple people that this person was supposed to be. It could have been a myriad of very simple naturalistic explanations. It could be that this tomb was never there. There was never Jesus in the tomb.
Don't you think that to accept these others, like maybe self-deception or self-delusion, hallucinations, or maybe something used to control the masses and stuff, wouldn't you say, if you were to believe that, you see the influence of Christianity on the world, that would be a conspiracy theory that would make something like the flat earth look like child's play in comparison? Wouldn't that be fair to say from a Christian perspective, someone saying, okay, well, if they're trying to explain this outside of the resurrection, then these conspiracy theories are pretty extreme. So it's reasonable to think that this is a really elaborate conspiracy theory, much more than even flat earth. Wouldn't you agree?
Say that there's still contention over this person actually even having a tomb. I would still say that there's contention between the linkage between this being a supernatural event or a divine event and this person actually raising from the dead, or it's just a human embellishment, kind of like how they did with King Arthur. It could be a myriad of different explanations that are naturalistic. I mean, it doesn't mean we should jump to the conclusion that this was a divine, interaction, especially with a minimal set of facts. And even if these facts are as presented, it still doesn't support a God existing.
Okay, we have to stop it there. Time's up.
Okay.
So, TinySmawz, now it's your 5-minute cross-examination to end the second round and to go on to final closing statements. Your 5 minutes starts when you say your first word.
Okay, so what is the evidence outside of the Gospels for this tomb?
Let's see. Well, we have. You said, what is the evidence outside of? What'd you say now? Repeat that question.
Gospels, outside of the Gospels.
Well, we have like mentions of Jesus, and like I mentioned, a couple: Pliny the Younger, Tacitus. I was trying to find the list here.
Claim my time. I'm asking about the tomb, not Jesus.
Oh, you want
tomb.
somebody something? I don't know where they how they specifically conclude this, but I do know that even secular scholars have concluded that the tomb was empty.
Can you give a source?
Yes.
Any source at all?
Yeah, Jacob Creeman. He said by far the most hold to the reliability of the biblical statements concerning the empty tomb. Then you have Gazara Vermez. When every argument has been considered and weighed, the only conclusion acceptable to the historian must be that the women who set out to pay their last respects to Jesus found to their concertation not a body but an empty tomb. And these are just two. I've got some more historians.
I reclaim my time. Hold on. So
wait,
the first one you provided was somebody who studies the Bible. The second one you provided was a philosophical argument about the shame of women claiming that they were at the tomb, or that because they were women, what they claimed was like I think it's, what is that? Some sort of
criterion of embarrassment.
Embarrassment, thank you. Yes, the criterion of embarrassment. I think that argument still doesn't provide the location of this tomb or a verification.
Oh, you were archaeologically. Location?
Yes, or if this location has any involvement with this Jesus person, and if there's any documentation, if there's a location, if there's some sources.
I know that there's some people who say that this is the likely location of tomb, but whether anybody knows that for a fact, I don't know. But there are people.
We don't have a location of the tomb, so we can reject that fact. Okay. What else do we have as far as the minimal facts goes?
Why would you reject it just because there's no location? I mean, you don't have a location
or evidence of this tomb.
I mean, there's a lot of historical figures and events that we don't have the locations for, but we don't reject them. That doesn't make sense.
Why ought we accept it?
Well, I'm just simply saying here, I guess they accept it based off of what they have studied, what's been written, and things like this. But I don't think it needs to be rejected just because you don't know where it's at. Because there'd be a lot of stuff in history we would reject if I were the case.
If there's no location for the tomb, then how do we know that this person came out of the tomb? And also, it doesn't lead to a resurrection as well. If we have claims of a resurrection, and we have a minimal amount of evidence that comes way after this event, then I think that we're hanging on a thread here. I don't think that that's enough to satiate the burden of God's existence.
Well, I mean, look, the way I look at it is either it does meet the burden that Jesus rose from the dead and that Christianity is true, thereby showing God exists, or you just have to say, okay, well, this was predicated on a lie, a mass deception, hallucinations, delusions, and stuff. So then that opens up the door to say, okay, well, what makes you think your own beliefs that you currently hold to aren't the result of these same things? So it opens up the door for problems for the atheists to even justify their own beliefs, if they're willing to bite that bullet.
That makes no sense.
Well, you're biting a bullet and saying that this could have happened on this grand scale. And your beliefs, like let's say you hold to the theory of evolution. What makes you think the theory of evolution isn't the result of self-deception, autocorrection, things like that?
So
Well, I'm
again,
just saying
we're
that it
trying
applies
to
to
show
everything.
how Jesus's existence, resurrection, is verified, and you haven't provided a shred of evidence.
Well, I mean, look, when you take the historical method and you see, hey, these are what historians, even non-Christian
This is the
historians,
historical method of verification.
yes.
We have independently verified sources for an event. Now, when it comes to a supernatural event, it's even harder to demonstrate that. It's even harder to prove that. So we need a hell of a lot more evidence than just personal testimony, claims of supposed eyewitnesses, which are not confirmed to be firsthand, and alleged, implications of it.
Okay, well, maybe we, as far as Jesus and his crucifixion, things like that, you have sources. Here's a list here: John, Paul's epistles, Hebrews, First Peter, Clement of Rome, Ignatius,
Finish
Justin.
up your sentence. We have to end the round.
Oh, well, I have actually quite a few lists here of sources about Jesus' crucifixion,
Sure.
so I don't think I need to read all those.
We can move on to final statements. Each person's going to get 3 minutes. Starting with you, NoDegree. It starts whenever you say your first word.
What did you say, 3 minutes?
Yeah, 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think this debate is a bit of the topic is the existence of God justified? And I think, yes, absolutely it is. I mentioned in the opening statement all the problems that arise if you think the non-existence of God is justified. Now, my opponent was not willing to say that the non-existence of God was justified, which I believe leaves me as the winner here, because as my position is, I'm at least holding to one and actually providing evidence to back it up. Provided lots of examples in my opening, and he is, even after quoting word for word, I'm rejecting the proposition that God exists, was still unwilling to say, okay, well, the non-existence of God is justified. So I don't understand how you can make that proclamation. I'm rejecting the claim God exists without thinking that you would have justification. But since he doesn't have justification, because he's not saying he holds to the non-existence of God and believe there's evidence for it, then that seemed to be just kind of what I would say blowing smoke and not really meaning what he said. So since the idea of a debate is you have opposing views, I was actually expecting to hear an argument for the non-existence of God or why God doesn't exist. Instead, all I heard was, okay, well, he's going to straw man, he's going to do this, this, and this. And I really didn't hear any argument here, any forthcoming argument. And I was the one that did all the legwork, did all the intellectual heavy lifting. And my opponent just simply seemed to be contradicting himself, seemed to be saying, I'm rejecting God existing, but I'm not rejecting that God exists. And with that, I think the audience should unanimously vote me as the winner of this debate as opposed to my opponent. And I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, with that, there's 40 seconds on the clock. TinySmawz, you get your 3 minutes for closing statements, and it starts whenever you say your first word.
As is foretold in my opening statement, the prophecies have been fulfilled. The strawmanning, the non sequiturs, it has been written. The burden shifting is real. The shifting of the burden, saying that I have to provide an argument for the non-existence of God, is exactly as predicted in the balls of the omen, the bauble of truth that I observed before this conversation took place. I saw that this man was going to strawman the shit out of me. And he did. I said at the beginning, the rejection is based upon the lack of evidence, the lack of justification, the lack of substantiation, and I think that that's warranted. It's also not my position that God does not exist. It's my position that I'm unconvinced of the proposition God exists. I laid out a blanket for you a little picnic, and I offered you all the little sandwiches. I offered you the bags of chips, the apples, whatever you wanted to bring on this picnic. We could have brought fried chicken. We could have got some potato salad without raisins, of course, because that's just ridiculous. And you could have ate, and you could have demonstrated God, but you failed. You followed my prophecy to a T. You strawmanned. You produced non sequiturs. You shifted the burden. This is what I predicted in my opening statement. And you followed through beautifully. And for that, I applaud you. Also claiming victory, that is kind of very humble of you. I don't even know what sarcasm is. I also think that maybe one day you'll humble yourself to realize that you have been defeated, not just here, but in many other debates. And to say that you have won these debates, I think that maybe you should get a second opinion. And with that, I concede my time.
Okay, and with that, there's 50 seconds on the clock. But yeah, that'll be the conclusion of that debate. Thank you guys for being here. I see that there's a poll up. Okay, thank you for whoever put that poll up. Thank you for whoever put that poll up. Thank you, mods. You guys, Jesus, I can't even put it into words. You guys are awesome, killing the game, or unaliving the game. But yeah. Thank you guys for debating. We got a couple minutes before Just Jim versus Kai, and that'll be the last debate of the evening. They're going to start at about 11:20 p.m. Central Daylight Time. So we got about like 12 minutes. Any comments, questions, concerns? Cyber, hey.
Hey, yeah, so I just have one question for NoDegree. And it's going to be, when we look at the historians you listed, we know that Josephus and Tacitus have been interpolated into. We know that the term Christ is a title meaning anointed one, and we have other individuals utilizing that term. With this said, can you name, going back to what Tiny asked, can you name a single non-Christian source that supports the existence of Jesus, Paul, or the disciples? Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually had a list I was reading out just a few minutes ago. Do you remember?
Well, keep in mind, they need to mention the term Jesus specifically, because we know that Christ is a title, right, with other people have also been referred to as Christ, not just Jesus.
Well, we're talking about Jesus of Nazareth, obviously.
Well, yeah, so you'll just need to provide me a source that is actually going to use the name Jesus, Paul, or any of his disciples. I won't accept Christ. Because, again, Christ can have alternate meanings to include Serapis.
Well,
So-
I mean, at the top, off the top of my head, I don't know if I can think of one, but it does seem weird that you would have that, because I think one can reasonably conclude that it's talking about a specific Jesus, a specific Christ. Doesn't, because of some of the things maybe said that maybe wouldn't necessarily apply to any others.
So, quick question, just so we can get on to the other question. What you're saying is that you don't have a list that historically supports that these individuals actually existed.
No, as far as what I was running here was the minimal facts argument. You don't really
Well,
need
that's not my
to do
question
that.
I asked. The question I asked, though, is do you have anything that historically supports, as a non-Christian source, that Jesus, Paul,
Not all-
or the disciples existed?
Well, yeah, actually, I have a lot of it. But what I'm saying is what you're saying here, I'm not sure what you're asking, but the minimal facts argument doesn't need to do with that. That's why I think people like your friend Christ before Jesus, I don't think they know how to deal with the minimal facts argument. I think
You don't even know the
it
minimal
would
facts.
really
You just
do them
been-
well
hold
to
on,
do
hold
that.
on. You don't
because-
know the minimal facts. You just been appealing to authority for that the whole time. You don't know the minimal facts.
No, I know the minimal
So
facts. I
don't
gave them.
go to that. But that's why
I literally gave the list of them, and the fact that this is I would offer him some constructive criticism. If he wants to be taken seriously, he needs to deal with Gary Habermas.
But
I don't
we
think
move
he
on.
can deal with Gary.
Yeah, we
Habermas.
can move on.
Everybody
So we
has
can't
dealt
have
with
any
Gary
answers.
Habermas. Anyways,
All right.
cool. Yeah, so
He's ran
no
through.
degree. NoDegree, you said that your argument was a minimal facts argument, right?
Well, that wasn't my argument for the debate. No, I just gave.
But
he wanted
the most
to know
compelling, the most compelling evidence you have for the resurrection appears to be Gary Habermas's minimal facts argument. Is that correct?
It was the one that I gave to show that if you reject it, you would have to come up with things.
Moving on. So cool. So the answer would be yes. So because we're trying to save time here, so you brought the empty tomb.
Yes.
You're aware that the empty tomb is not a part of Gary Habermas's minimal facts argument, correct?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Cool. So then why did you include that as part of the minimal facts argument?
Did you remember me saying that that's a controversial one? And it isn't
controversial.
Used all
it's
the time?
not included. It's never.
Okay, well,
he completely removed it because it is not even agreed upon by the vast majority of scholars.
Okay, but I can point to I have a unique argument that's actually unique from Gary Habermas's. I don't think you need to go with the consensus of scholars.
That's great. But when you cite Gary Habermas and the fucking minimal facts argument, maybe you then stick to the minimal facts instead of bringing up the empty tomb.
You didn't hear what I said in the debate. I didn't actually. I did mention Gary Habermas, but I didn't specifically say I was giving his argument. I even specifically said that the tomb is a controversial one. But my view is, look, if you can point to even non-Christian scholars who will accept the empty tomb, the consensus shouldn't matter. You should be like, okay, well, why is it the case that a non-Christian scholar will accept the empty tomb? And maybe look into it and kind of deal with that instead of just worrying about the consensus.
I just want to make sure. So even if I just want to make sure.
Consensus.
Wait. So NoDegree, I just want to make sure real quick because then I know I got to drop. So you're saying if even one person who is not a Christian thinks that the empty tomb may have existed, that is enough for you?
Well, I wouldn't say just one, but multiple.
No, because you're citing even just one.
No, I can cite more than one. You want me to cite a multitude of them?
You know what? How about you just DM me because we've done this dance before. So how about you just DM me?
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, there's just multiple people that do accept the empty tomb. So.
Oh shoot. Okay. Thank you guys for that. Also, yeah, if anyone got a screenshot of the results, please Discord it to me for my records.
Oh yeah, did I win?
I'm not sure, but I hope someone sends it to my Discord for my records. Thank you. Go ahead, Furry. You got anything for us?
Sure. My question was actually for Tiny. I'm waiting for him to teacup.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. So I was wondering if if you could just restate the specific straw man that you felt NoDegree was pulling here, because I think that some people who maybe joined late didn't hear it.
Sure. So he was saying that if I'm an atheist, I hold to the position that God doesn't exist. And I don't hold to that position.
Well, you did say, I'm rejecting the proposition God exists in your opening statement.
Based on the fact that it's not been demonstrated, justified, or presented with enough evidence for me to be convinced of it.
Well, that seems like you're saying, well, I'm not holding to it, but I'm holding to it. That seems like a contradiction to me.
No, I'm not holding to the position God doesn't exist. I'm unconvinced that God exists.
You're saying I'm not holding to the proposition that God does not exist, but I'm rejecting the proposition that God exists. That's what you said. You said in the opening statement, I'm rejecting the proposition
that means
that God exists.
I don't hold to that proposition as being justified or validated. It's not saying God doesn't exist.
Okay, so rejecting it, you don't think is... See, my problem was rejecting it implies you're holding to the proposition that God does not exist. You understand the confusion there, right?
You're straw man. I agree.
Well, I just think words mean words, right? That's what a
the word
famous
straw man
atheist
is what you're trying to say
says
right
on
now.
here.
And saying
Words
that
mean
I hold to the
words.
position that God doesn't exist.
Okay, well, look, I don't want to debate it anymore, but that's just kind of the confusion I was concerned about, deeply concerned about.
I agree. You're confused. I agree.
Okay, next person. In the mix, what you got for us?
So Tiny, are you pre-asserting that God doesn't exist, but you hold the worldview that there is no evidence of God to exist? So your evidence is relying on a pre-assertion? Is that the claim being made,
No.
Tiny?
No, I haven't been presented the sufficient evidence for me to be convinced that God exists.
But is the evidence of God existing dependent on your belief?
Depending on the evidence.
But if the evidence of God existing is not dependent on your belief, what is there to actually prove to you?
Just unconvinced of God's existence. I just want to see the evidence that supports God's existence. That's it.
There's no evidence. Or there's lackluster.
I would love you to provide evidence for that claim.
No, I'm saying there's lack.
Right,
I'm stating the same claim that he's making.
You just committed a fallacy. That's the equivocation fallacy.
You want to define the fallacy for me.
So again, in your claim, you're asserting that there is no God that exists, yet you also
I said there's no evidence.
Exactly. If there is no evidence for you to claim that
doesn't
God
mean there's no God.
Exist, yet there is evidence that
You can
God
say
does
that there's
exist.
minimal evidence or very weak evidence, but it's not convincing evidence.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not dependent.
Gracious, right?
It's not dependent on whether you believe or not. Evidence is.
Okay, but how do we move on? Because we're running out of time here.
Oh, did I come to a fucking... Oh, sorry. Can I swear on this panel?
Guys, right? Like we ask a question, then we move on to the next person.
Yeah, we got to get to
a bunch of new people joined. That's the problem, including myself. So I apologize.
I have a question for Tiny here. I know I think you did this in the beginning, but how did you define justified or justification?
What?
It's a question for Tiny. Like I was asking him how. Can you guys hear me? I was just asking him how you define like justification.
To show or prove to be right or reasonable.
And how? And maybe how you define reasonable, I guess. But I guess I don't know. I guess my problem with this is that I'm not too sure that NoDegree didn't do his job here. But that's why I want to know how we're going to cashing out these terms.
If you want to keep disseminating, words inside words inside words, it's going to be it's going to be way too long, man. You decide reasonable, something that is of reason. Okay, define reason.
Yeah, how long is long?
Keep going and going and going with that, dude.
Wait,
we hit a brick wall.
Are we asking questions?
Define going.
What do you mean by define?
Hey,
yeah, we are on.
Wait, who's asking whom a question? We have to hold on. Wait, let's try.
Right,
no, whom is asking who a question? By the way.
But we do have to end it there. We're
guys, it's 12:20.
That's what I'm trying to say. Exactly.
Yeah, we're on the dot. So we have to move on.
That's it. Time's up.
Final one. Who's got it?
Teeny.
No, that's it. Time's up. No, that's it.
It's a final one.
It's over.
No, we gotta get to
all right, guys.
My bad.
Coming up, we have no questions right now. We have to move on.
But thank you guys so much for being here. All right, maybe some other time we'll get the questions answered.
Man, hope I come sooner next time. Have a good night, guys.
No way, Nated.
Who the hell got that? Who the hell got that?
Come sooner.
Tiny got it. Nated's
That's big Tiny right there, bro.
Thank you.
Yo, Nated, send me
really
one.
appreciate that. Thank you so much.
What's the score? 4-0? 4-0, right?